So let's talk about one of the most frustrating what-ifs of this entire offseason, Edwin Diaz. The Blue Jays needed a closer desperately. Everyone knew it. The entire baseball world knew Toronto's bullpen was their biggest weakness after watching it cost them Game 7 of the World Series. And Edwin Diaz, one of the absolute best closers in baseball when healthy, was sitting right there. He was available. The Mets were open to moving him. All the pieces were in place for Toronto to solve their biggest problem in one move. And what happened? The Dodgers came in and took him. Just like that. Toronto missed. Again. And I want to be clear about something right off the bat. This isn't hindsight. This isn't me being smart after the fact. Everyone knew Diaz was available. The reports were everywhere. The Mets were looking to shed payroll. Diaz was coming off an injury, but was healthy again. And he was exactly the kind of proven elite closer that teams kill for. The Blue Jays should have been all over this from day one. They should have been on the phone with the Mets immediately after Game 7 ended saying, whatever you want, we'll give it to you. We need this guy. But they didn't. They hesitated. They overthought it. And the Dodgers, who just won the World Series and already have everything, came in and stole him right out from under them. Let me tell you why this hurts so much. Edwin Diaz, when he's right, is not just good. He's not just a solid closer. He's one of the most dominant relief pitchers of this generation. His peak years with the Mets before the injury, he was unhittable. Triple-digit fastball, a slider that makes hitters look foolish, and the mentality of a true closer. The guy thrives in pressure. He wants the ball in the biggest moments. That's who the Blue Jays needed. That's who they desperately needed after Jeff Hoffman gave up that crushing home run to Miguel Rojas. Instead, the Dodgers get him, and Toronto is stuck with the same question marks they had before. Now, I know what some people are going to say. They're going to say Diaz was injured last year. He missed most of the season. He's a risk. And yeah, that's true. He tore his patellar tendon in the World Baseball Classic doing a celebration. It was a freak injury. It cost him almost the entire season. And there are legitimate questions about whether he'll be the same pitcher. But you know what? That risk is exactly why he was available in a trade. If he was perfectly healthy with no concerns, the Mets wouldn't have been shopping him. The injury created an opportunity, and good teams take advantage of opportunities. The Dodgers understood that. Toronto apparently didn't. Here's what really kills me about this. The Blue Jays' closer situation is a complete disaster right now. Who closes games for them? Jeff Hoffman, after he gave up the biggest home run in franchise history. Jordan Romano, who's been hurt and inconsistent. Tyler Rogers, who they just signed but has never really been a traditional ninth inning guy. There's no clarity. There's no defined closer with a track record of success in high leverage playoff situations. And that's a massive problem when you're trying to win a championship. Meanwhile, the Dodgers, who already had one of the best bullpens in baseball, just added Edwin Diaz. They're getting richer while Toronto stays stuck. Let's talk about what Toronto could have given up to get Diaz. The Mets wanted to clear salary and get some prospects back. They weren't asking for the moon. This wasn't a Juan Soto-level trade package. The Blue Jays have prospects. They have young players who could interest New York. They absolutely had the pieces to make this deal happen. But they didn't pull the trigger. And I think I know why. They were too focused on the Kyle Tucker situation. They were worried about payroll commitments. They were scared of taking on Diaz's contract and his injury history, so they passed. And the Dodgers, who never overthink anything when they see value, just took him. You want to know what's really maddening? The Dodgers don't even need Edwin Diaz as badly as Toronto does. They have Evan Phillips, who's been excellent. They have depth in their bullpen. They can afford to take the risk on Diaz because even if it doesn't work out, they'll be fine. But for the Blue Jays, landing Diaz could have been franchise-altering. It could have been the move that puts them over the top. Instead, they watch the Dodgers make them even more unstoppable, while Toronto's biggest weakness remains completely unaddressed. And let's be honest about what the Dodgers are doing here. They're not just building a team. They're collecting every single elite player they can find to make sure nobody else can beat them. They got Shohei Ohtani, they got Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts. They have the best roster in baseball already, and now they're adding Diaz to make their bullpen even more ridiculous. That's what championship organizations do. They identify weaknesses, even small ones, and they aggressively fix them. The Blue Jays identified their weakness, had a chance to fix it, and just stood there with their hands in their pockets while someone else did it. Let me paint you a picture of what could have been. Imagine Edwin Diaz in a Blue Jays uniform, coming into Game 7 of the World Series in the ninth inning with a one-run lead. His entrance music hits, the crowd goes insane, and he goes out there and shuts the door. 3 up, 3 down. World Series championship. That's not fantasy. That's a realistic scenario if Toronto had made this trade. Diaz has done it before. He's been to the playoffs. He's closed out huge games. He has the stuff and the mentality. Instead, the Blue Jays rolled with what they had, and it wasn't good enough. Now, some people will argue that the injury risk was too high, that Diaz might not be the same pitcher after a major knee injury. And look, that's a fair concern. Patellar tendon injuries are serious. But you know what's also serious? Not having a legitimate closer when you're trying to win a championship. The Blue Jays are in win now mode. They just made the World Series. Their window is open, but it's not going to stay open forever. This was the time to be aggressive, to take calculated risks, to go all in. Instead, they played it safe. And playing it safe doesn't win you championships. Here's another thing that bothers me. The cost to acquire Diaz was probably pretty reasonable because of the injury and the contract. The Mets weren't in a position to demand a king's ransom. They wanted to move money and reboot their roster. Toronto could have gotten him without gutting their farm system. Compare that to what they gave up for Kyle Tucker. They traded away prospects for Tucker, but they wouldn't do the same for a closer. That doesn't make any sense to me unless the front office genuinely doesn't understand how important elite bullpen arms are. And let's talk about the message this sends. When you pass on Edwin Diaz and watch him go to the Dodgers, you're telling your players and your fans that you're not serious about fixing the problem that cost you everything. The bullpen blew Game 7. Everyone saw it. Everyone knows it needs to be addressed. And then the front office just shrugs and moves on like it's not a big deal. That's unacceptable. That's how you lose your clubhouse. That's how you lose credibility with your fan base. I also think there's a competitive balance issue here that people aren't talking about enough. The Dodgers keep getting better while everyone else stays the same or gets worse. They have unlimited money, unlimited resources, and they're not afraid to use them. Meanwhile, teams like the Blue Jays, who actually need to make these moves, are too cautious or too cheap or too worried about risk. And the gap between the haves and have-nots just keeps growing. Toronto had a chance to narrow that gap by landing Diaz, and they blew it. Now, let's talk about what happens next, because this is where it gets really depressing. The Blue Jays are going to scramble to find bullpen help. They'll probably sign some mid-tier free agents or make a trade for a decent reliever, but they're not going to get anyone close to Edwin Diaz's caliber because those guys don't grow on trees. Elite closers are rare. When one becomes available, you jump on it. Toronto didn't jump, and now they're going to spend the entire season wishing they had. And here's the nightmare scenario. Next October, the Blue Jays are in the playoffs again. They're facing the Dodgers. Game tied in the ninth inning, and Edwin Diaz comes in for Los Angeles. He mows down the Blue Jays in order, and the Dodgers win. Toronto goes home, and everyone's sitting there thinking about how Diaz could have been wearing a Blue Jays uniform instead. That's going to haunt this organization if it happens. And based on how things are going, it probably will happen. The bottom line is this. The Blue Jays had a golden opportunity to solve their biggest problem. Edwin Diaz was available, he was gettable, and he would have transformed their bullpen from a liability into a strength. Instead, they missed. They hesitated. They let the Dodgers take him. And now Toronto is right back where they started, hoping and praying that somehow, some way, their bullpen will be good enough next October. Spoiler alert, it won't be. And when they lose another heartbreaking playoff series because they couldn't get the final 3 outs, remember this moment. Remember that they had a chance to fix it and chose not to.